Okay, just to help get this idea across, I thought I'd do a really quick, simple example of this kind of layered or stacked materials as I do it in Modo. So a simple label here with some gold foil embossed as well, just a regular CMYK ink, a metallic ink, and then a paper texture underneath all of that. So I'll go through quickly how those interact with each other and how they stack up, and how basically that's what I'd like to be able to achieve in Cinema 4D with Corona, if possible. So if nobody familiar with the way Modo works, it has nodal materials, but basically everything hinges around the shader tree, which you could think of in simplistic terms as being a little bit like layers in Photoshop. And groups of materials or a material can be masked to a particular item or a selection set or that sort of thing. So what I have here is a simple label with a selection set for the front faces and two UVs. So in the UVs I've got one for general texturing, which is just for things I'd use that for paper textures, for general texturing that might be consistent across various elements in the scene, not just one label. And then I've got the graphic textures, which is just the front face in this case, and I've just hidden the rest of the UVs in the corner here because that is usually the best way to deal with embossing with displacement that you only want to affect on one part to avoid it splitting. I just hide the rest of the UV down there, or sometimes I might just delete the UVs for the back. So that double UV setup is really essential, I find, because if you want a general texture like a paper that's on multiple things, you don't really want to prepare a specific texture exactly for that label at that size, and that would just drive me nuts. So back in render view here, and I'll do a quick breakdown of how this fits together. So in the library down here in the corner, you can see this is somewhat similar to what you might find in your general materials sitting in Cinema 4D, as far as I can tell. So you just define a material, and in Modo that can be directly on a mesh, or it can be established in the library, which is what I typically do, and then when you grab something from there and drag it out into the scene, it just gets referenced to it. So that's what I've done with the white paper here, for instance, because that might go on 6 or 7 different labels on this bottle. So I don't want to duplicate it 6 times, so I just do it in the library and drag it out to each item that it needs to be applied to. So it's a bit like selecting a mesh in Cinema 4D and then pressing apply, as far as I can tell. And then the paper, and I've exaggerated the texture here just so you can see, there's something going on. We've got some fibers and all that sort of thing. And this is made up of a standard material and then a normal roughness and a diffuse on top of that. So that's pretty basic stuff. What's interesting though is then the gold foil, for instance, has no material in it itself. It's simply a bunch of channel overrides, if you like. So maps for roughness, for color, bump and that sort of thing, adding to the underlying material. And that's particularly significant when you look at, the metallic does the same thing, but in a slightly different way, because that's a metallic ink, not a metal. Now with the way the label's applied here, you can see that I've got an ink layer here, and this is one important aspect. That multiplies over the paper texture. So you can see, just like if you were printing non-opaque inks in the real world onto textured paper, it would multiply to that and be absorbed into the paper, not sit as a pure green on top of that texture. So that's really important to the way that I set this stuff up normally. No matter what the paper texture is, I typically define that first and then multiply the standard printing over the top of that, so you get a slightly more realistic result. And of course the ink is just inheriting the bump and roughness and everything else. It's just purely diffuse. And that's sitting down here as a diffuse layer. And then this is one of the things I think is perhaps a little bit unique about Modo. If you trip on over here to the side, you can see that each one of these layers gets its own settings to manipulate. The UV projection type, the UV texture to use, as well as you know, various values similar to what you get in any other package, gamma, so on. But that texture location, the UV mapping, is basically available on every single layer, all independently, and that seems to me to be the real benefit so far I'm seeing in Modo, and I'm hoping that I can get this elsewhere as well, because not only do I have the UV, I've also got the blend mode. I can just have normal, yeah, or I can have multiply, add, or anything, you know, the standard sort of things you'd expect. So that just makes that utterly trivial to take this texture, which is applied with the graphic UV map, on the white paper, which down here in the library is these textures here within white paper are all using the texture UV. But I could have another layer in here using, with another image, say another roughness map or something like that, and have that be using a different UV, or not a UV at all, just cubic mapping or something like that. So you can mix and match all this stuff as much as you like, and then take that whole group of things, the paper, and then apply that to other stuff. And out here in the shader tree where that reference is, I can still even change the opacity of that, should I want to, although you wouldn't normally, because that would get a bit crazy, but that's terrifically handy. So then if we just move up a little bit further, and of course I've got this on preview mode at the moment, so the displacement is looking super chunky and disgusting, but don't worry about that. So we've got the diffuse on the paper, and then we've got, well, this is all sitting within a mask, which is a mask to the part. You can have selection sets, a material tag on a polygon, or you can have part tags as well. So Modo's got those three. Oh, and an item tag as well. So you could select an entire mesh and create a mask around the entire thing as one entity as well. I tend to use parts and selection sets quite a lot. So, and I use them in a way that's sort of logical to the way the thing is constructed. So part is for the whole label, because that is a part, and a selection set, such as these here, the graphics, is just the front faces of that label. And that just works. My head, I can get my head around that really easily, because it just seems to make sense. So with the next, if we go up the tree here and see, we've got the diffuse, and then we've got this metallic ink, and this metallic ink is down here in reference from down here in the library, and there is no standard material with this. I've simply got an override and it's set up with a metalness workflow. So this is a diffuse color override for that, which is constant, and then setting the metallic value to 100%, and then setting the roughness and the bump. And you'll note that with any of these things, they can have opacity and blend modes with them. So I'm adding that to whatever it will be on top of. So when I use this above the paper, it's getting 0.5% opacity of 100% in add mode, which just gives it a very small amount of extra bump, just lifting it slightly above the other, but not, but also it's still showing through the paper bump. So in any of these textures here, you can just make them add to, override, or influence to any degree the things that are underneath that, wherever it's used in the shader tree. Super, super handy. So that metallic is then referenced here in the list inside a mask, which is just a organizational folder. It's just got apply to all, so it's not actually being limited in any way. The way it's been limited is actually by this mask, a group mask, an alpha, if you like, and that's using the graphic UV mask. And that's what I meant where, you know, I've got this stacking where I'm alternating between paper using a general texturing, then a metallic texture using just, well, no, there's no UVs in that, and then that being masked by something set to the graphic UV, and that is interacting with the paper underneath in a way that what I like. And then above that we've got the foil here, which is again not a complete material but a series of overrides, which basically sets the metallic, the diffuse colour, the bump and so on, and a normal map and a few other bits and pieces, and it's adding to the texture that's underneath. So that paper texture is still some of it here, it's not completely obliterated, and there's a displacement on top of all of that at the top. So with the metallic again, that's got some image maps in it, and so they're set using the image maps are using the general texture UV, and I tend to texture all these things at the same scale, so they're a bit easier to apply. And then the mask for that foil up here in the shader tree, where this is referenced, is using the graphic UV. So there's this flip-flop all the way up here. Use whatever UV combination and blending mode that you like. And that's what just seems, I just have not been able to get my head around getting that done in anything else. And sitting on the top again of all of that is the displacement texture, which is an emboss and all of that, which I've attached a render as well, so you can see this in a decent quality, so you can see what it's doing. But that's applied using the graphic UV rather than the texture one. So you can just go up and down here, stack up the things in an order that makes sense, and limit them via multiple different types of masks, all super easy, and then change the blending modes as well on the fly to whatever makes sense. If anybody's got any clue about how I go about doing this in Cinema 4D with Corona, I'd be super grateful. But right now I haven't seen any way to actually achieve this. So cool. Thanks for watching. Cheers, guys.